In the grand story of English history, there are threads of gold and threads of blood, but rarely does a single story hold so much of both. And rarely does the fate of a nation, the future of its faith, and the stability of its crown rest so heavily on just two people bound by love, then torn apart by desperation. What if one of the most seismic events in history, England's break with the Catholic Church, all started with a love story? A story that began not with King Henry VIII, but with his older brother. Before she was Henry's rejected queen, Catherine of Aragon was a celebrated Spanish princess, destined for the English throne. And before her marriage was seen as a curse, it was hailed as a divine blessing, a union that promised a golden age. This is the story of how a fairy tale romance became a national crisis, and how a royal marriage changed England forever. To understand the end, we have to start in a different court, under a different sun. Catherine of Aragon, who we know as Catherine of Aragon, was born on December 15, 1485, into Europe's most powerful monarchy. She was the youngest daughter of Queen Isabella I of Castile and King Ferdinand II of Aragon, the legendary monarchs who united Spain and backed Christopher Columbus. Catherine was the definition of royalty. Her blood was a currency of immense value. From the time she was just 3 years old, her destiny was sealed. She was betrothed to Arthur, Prince of Wales, the heir to King Henry VII of England. This wasn't just a marriage. It was a massive political alliance. It was a pact between the established power of Spain and England's new Tudor dynasty, which had only recently seized the crown in battle. Catherine was raised for this. Her formidable mother, Queen Isabella, made sure her daughters were educated and capable, not just political pawns. Catherine was schooled in Latin, theology, philosophy, and modern languages. She was pious, smart, and had a quiet strength that would come to define her entire life. In 1501, at 15, she finally made the long journey to England to marry her prince. Their wedding at St. Paul's Cathedral was spectacular, a symbol of a secure English future. The young couple was sent to Ludlow Castle to begin their life together. But the fairy tale didn't last. Just 5 months later, a sickness swept through the castle. Both Arthur and Catherine fell gravely ill. Catherine pulled through. Arthur, the hope of England, did not. Just like that, at 16 years old, Catherine of Aragon was a widow in a foreign land. Her future was thrown into chaos. She was no longer the future Queen of England, but simply the Dowager Princess of Wales. Prince Arthur's death was a diplomatic nightmare. King Henry VII wanted to keep Catherine's huge dowry and the Spanish alliance, but nobody was sure how. For 7 long, frustrating years, Catherine was trapped in political limbo. She lived like a virtual prisoner in London, often without money, completely uncertain of her fate. But even then, her resilience was clear. In 1507, her father appointed her as the Spanish ambassador to the English court, making her what many consider to be the first female ambassador in European history. It was a smart move to keep her in England and a testament to her skills. During this time, a new figure was emerging. Arthur's younger brother, the handsome and athletic Prince Henry. 5 years younger than Catherine, he was everything his brother wasn't: boisterous, charming, and full of energy. He'd grown up knowing the dignified Spanish princess, and historical accounts suggest he developed a real affection, maybe even love, for his brother's widow. But there was a major hurdle. The book of Leviticus in the Bible forbade a man from marrying his brother's wife. Catherine, however, insisted that her marriage to Arthur was never consummated because of his youth and illness. If true, this would make the biblical rule irrelevant. To be absolutely sure, a special permission slip, a dispensation, was requested and granted by the Pope, officially clearing the way. When Henry VII died in 1509, the new King Henry VIII didn't waste any time. One of his very first acts as king was to marry the 23-year-old Catherine of Aragon. He was just shy of his 18th birthday. A few days later, they were crowned together at Westminster Abbey to the cheers of massive crowds. The years of uncertainty were over. Catherine was finally Queen of England. It seemed like the start of a glorious new era. The court was alive with parties, jousts, and scholarship. Henry adored his queen, and Catherine was a devoted and popular wife, deeply in love with her charismatic husband. Catherine was much more than a ceremonial queen. In the early years, she was a true partner to Henry, a capable and trusted advisor. Her biggest test came in 1513. Henry was away fighting in France, so he named Catherine as Queen Regent, putting her in charge of the entire kingdom. It was a sign of his complete faith in her, and she wouldn't let him down. Seeing an opportunity, King James IV of Scotland, Henry's own brother-in-law, invaded from the north. Catherine, though heavily pregnant, rose to the occasion with incredible strength. She addressed the English troops herself, giving a powerful speech to rally them. She organized the entire defense from strategy to supplies. The result was the Battle of Flodden, a crushing defeat for the Scots where their king was killed. As a trophy, legend says she sent her husband the bloodied coat of the fallen Scottish king. She had proven herself a formidable ruler. But behind this political victory, a personal tragedy was unfolding. The baby she was carrying during the Flodden campaign wasn't born alive, and it wasn't the first time. In 1511, she'd given birth to a son, Henry, and the celebrations were enormous. But the joy lasted only 52 days before the infant prince died. Catherine then endured a heartbreaking series of miscarriages and stillbirths. The problem of the succession started to cast a long, dark shadow. The Tudor dynasty was still new, and its claim to the throne wasn't entirely secure. A male heir was essential for stability. In an age where people saw God's will in everything, whispers began. Was their marriage cursed? Was God punishing them? Catherine's inability to produce a son was no longer just a private sorrow. It was becoming a national crisis. In 1516, she did give birth to a healthy child who survived, a daughter named Mary. But in the ruthless world of 16th century politics, a daughter just wasn't enough. The king needed a son. By the mid-1520s, the royal marriage was over 20 years old. Henry was in his 30s, Catherine in her 40s and past her childbearing years. The hope for a male heir from her was gone. Henry's anxiety turned into a desperate obsession. He started searching for a reason, a justification for his problem, and he found it in the very same Bible verse that had been set aside for them. Leviticus. If a man shall take his brother's wife, they shall be childless. Even though he had a daughter, Henry decided childless meant without sons. He convinced himself that his marriage was cursed by God. This private belief quickly blew up into a public crisis, known as the King's Great Matter. Henry's goal was simple. He needed the Pope to grant an annulment, to declare his marriage to Catherine illegitimate from the very beginning. This would free him to remarry and have a legitimate son. His mission was supercharged by a new obsession, a captivating young woman at court named Anne Boleyn. A lady-in-waiting to the Queen, Anne was stylish, witty, and fiercely intelligent. She was everything Catherine wasn't, young, exotic, and magnetic. Henry, who had taken mistresses before, including Anne's own sister, was completely infatuated. But Anne refused to be just another royal mistress. Whether for ambition or principle, she held out for the ultimate prize, marriage and the crown. Her refusal only made Henry want her more. She was the answer to his prayers, a fertile young woman who could give him the son he craved. The king now had two powerful motives, a crisis of conscience and a passionate new love. He put his top minister, Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, on the case of securing the annulment from Rome. Wolsey was confident. He couldn't have been more wrong. Catherine of Aragon was the daughter of Spain's most powerful monarchs and had been Queen of England for 2 decades. She was not going to be cast aside quietly. When Henry told her his plan for her to go quietly into a convent, she was horrified and refused. In her eyes, she was Henry's true and lawful wife, and their daughter Mary was the legitimate heir. To accept an annulment would be to call herself a sinner and her daughter a bastard. Her faith, her honor, and her love for her child would not allow it. The legal battle that followed was epic. Wolsey tried to hear the case in England, but Catherine refused to recognize the court's authority. She appealed directly to Rome, which turned the crisis into an international incident. And in Rome, she had a powerful ally she could count on, her nephew, the Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V. In 1527, Charles's armies had sacked Rome and had the Pope, Clement VII, as a virtual prisoner. The Pope was in no position to anger Europe's most powerful ruler by disgracing his aunt. Caught in an impossible trap, the Pope stalled. He sent a representative, Cardinal Campeggio, to England to hear the case with Wolsey at a special court at Blackfriars in 1529. It was here that Catherine made her most dramatic move. Instead of speaking to the judges, she walked across the court and knelt at her husband's feet. In a moving, emotional speech, she spoke directly to Henry, reminding him of her loyalty and her love. She swore, as she always had, that she had come to his bed as a virgin. It was a breathtaking moment of courage, a queen fighting for her life, her honor, and her child's future. The court was stunned. Catherine then rose, curtsied, and walked out, refusing to ever return. She had won the moral victory. The court was a failure, and the case was sent back to Rome to die a slow death. For Henry, this was a total humiliation. His rage needed a target, and it landed squarely on Cardinal Wolsey. Blamed for the failure, Wolsey was stripped of his titles and power. His fall was as fast and brutal as his rise had been. And Henry, more determined than ever, realized that if the Pope wouldn't give him what he wanted, he would have to find another way, a more radical way. The failure at Blackfriars was the point of no return. Blocked by the Pope, Henry started listening to more radical advisors, men like Thomas Cromwell and Thomas Cranmer. They offered a revolutionary solution. If the Pope won't grant the annulment, then get rid of the Pope's authority in England. Henry himself would become master of his own church. What happened next was a seismic political revolution. In 1531, Henry permanently separated from Catherine, banishing her from court and, in a truly cruel blow, forbidding her from seeing their daughter Mary. Between 1532 and 1534, Parliament passed a series of laws that systematically dismantled papal power. The 1533 Act in Restraint of Appeals declared that the English monarch, not the Pope, had the final say in all religious matters. With his new power, Henry made the sympathetic Thomas Cranmer the new Archbishop of Canterbury. In May 1533, Cranmer's court declared Henry's marriage to Catherine null and void. Henry had already secretly married a pregnant Anne Boleyn months earlier. Now, Anne was crowned queen. Catherine's daughter Mary was declared illegitimate and cut from the line of succession in favor of the child Anne was carrying, who, to Henry's rage, also turned out to be a daughter, Elizabeth. The revolution was sealed with the 1534 Act of Supremacy, which declared Henry VIII the supreme head of the Church of England. The break with Rome was final. This wasn't a switch to Protestantism overnight. That would come later. But it was the beginning of the English Reformation, an act that would unleash centuries of religious conflict. And it all started because a king desperately needed a son. For Catherine, this was a living nightmare. She refused to use her demoted title, Dowager Princess of Wales. To her dying day, she signed her letters, Catherine the Queen. Henry moved her from one crumbling castle to the next, keeping her isolated. Her health broke under the strain, but her spirit never did. Her defiance was so profound that even her staunchest adversary, Thomas Cromwell, reportedly admitted, if not for her sex, she could have defied all the heroes of history. Catherine of Aragon's story is one of incredible resilience. Her refusal to back down literally changed the course of a nation. But she was only the first. Henry's quest for an heir was far from over, and the road ahead was filled with even more turmoil and tragedy. If you found this story compelling, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next chapter on the dramatic rise and fall of Anne Boleyn. And let us know in the comments, in this impossible struggle, who do you think was ultimately right? Henry, driven by his duty to his dynasty, or Catherine, driven by her unwavering faith? On January 7, 1536, at Kimbolton Castle, Catherine of Aragon died. She was 50 years old. She had been denied a final visit from her daughter Mary. In her last letter to Henry, she forgave him for everything. When the news reached London, it said that Henry and Anne Boleyn wore yellow, a color that could signify joy in England, but which was also the color of mourning in Catherine's native Spain. Catherine of Aragon is often remembered as the tragic first wife, the discarded queen. But she was so much more. She was a scholar, a diplomat, a warrior queen, and a woman of unshakable integrity. Her personal tragedy became the catalyst for one of the most profound transformations in English history. The king's great matter led directly to the English Reformation, the transfer of immense wealth from the monasteries to the crown, and the creation of a national church that put the monarch, not the pope, at its head. The very marriage that was meant to secure the Tudor dynasty through an alliance with Catholic Spain ironically ended up severing England from the Catholic world entirely. Catherine of Aragon lost her husband, her crown, and her child, but she never lost her dignity. She fought for her truth until her last breath, and in doing so, this Spanish princess left an indelible mark on the soul of England.